Hi, I am Peter. Some people may know me as DYKO. I'm going to take a look at my collection of suzo joysticks. First I have to say that this is totally unscripted, so I'm just improvising a bit. I've got a collection here. This is probably their first model. It's the Suzo Arcade. It's got a micro switch button. The stick itself is also micro switched. I think it's a really great joystick. It's great for Commodore 64 games and other retro systems. This was the first model, but they went through a number of revisions. Here's a bash version for the C64. Then they made this one, the Arcade Turbo. It's a bit different. It's not actually a turbo joystick at all. It only has that name, but it doesn't have turbo fire. It's pretty much the same as this, except it's got a different stick, which isn't as comfortable, but it has an extra button. There's a switch at the back, and what this does is basically it switches which one of these is active. But it's not the case for all of these versions. This one is pretty much the same thing, but there's a small difference. This one was made for the MSX computer. It supports two fire buttons, so you have two independent buttons. They're still the same switch, and it switches between these two. But with this one, it only acts as a one switch model, or one button model, so to say. So in that case, this switch at the back either disables one of these. I don't know why they make two versions of this, but I find it quite remarkable. And then they made this. This is the Prof Competition 9000. It's basically a clone of the famous Competition Pro. It's not as good. This was made somewhere in the early 90s. By that time they kind of went downhill with the quality of their joysticks, because this thing is completely made of plastic, while the older models are made of steel, and I find that quite remarkable. This is really good stuff. This thing is rock solid. I really don't know why they changed to plastic with those later sticks. I think it was just cost cutting or something. Well, and then we have this. This is probably their most advanced model, the Prof Competition 9000 Deluxe. It's got this thing again, it's got the switch again, it's for MSX, and it's got rapid fire. Well, this one is slightly broken. The rapid fire doesn't really work anymore, but the idea is that you can basically dial the button, and then it turns a pot meter and it changes the rapid fire rate. Then there are some other interesting differences between the different revisions. These were originally made with a micro switch fire button, but some of the later models, also of this one and of this one, have a leaf switch in there. And I think that's not as good as a micro switch. I don't know why they changed it, but I find it strange, especially because the leaf switches have a really, it can either be too stiff or too sloppy, while the micro switches always has a positive feel to it. I just think it's better. It has better wear and tear characteristics. Then they made some other small changes. For instance, this is the oldest one, and this is a slightly newer one. It still has the micro switch, but I don't know if you can see it closely on the camera, but there's a small difference in the stick. This one is a bit, it sort of blends in. it also has a different texture. Whereas this one, it's kind of sits on top of there, and it has a harsher transition in here. Well, this one is sort of curved. It's just a small difference, and it's really a nuisance. But and another thing, the spring in here is different too. It's made of rubber. Originally, these ones had a kind of soft black rubber in there, and it's really nice. Especially if you, I don't know if it works here, but if you put it on the table and it vibrates really nicely. And these later sticks, they use a slightly different kind of rubber, which is harder, and it can get brittle actually. It's just like an old garden hose. And I think there's some softener in the rubber that kind of evaporates, and the rubber itself kind of becomes brittle. It's slightly, it has a small tendency to crack over time, but still it's not really a big deal. It's still great, but it's just, it just feels a bit different. But other than that, it's not really that different at all. But well, there's just a few minor revisions they went through, I guess. Well, next up, I'm gonna crack one of these open and let's look what's inside. Okay, welcome to the second part of the video. I've opened up two joysticks, the original arcade and the arcade turbo. First, let's look at the inside of the original arcade. This is from a model with a micro switch. Basically, how this works is you've got this thing with the centering ring on there, and it just pushes on the micro switches, kind of like this. The rubber itself, it's like this. It's this thing here, and that's takes care of the centering. And this particular one is really nice and soft. This is from the arcade turbo, and this has the different type of rubber in there, which is, I think, a bit stiffer. It's different, and it's a thing that kind of, just like an old garden hose can start to crack. It just has a slightly different feel to it. Now let's look at the leaf switches. A leaf switch model looks like this. It's really just a piece of springy metal. It's quite different than a micro switch, and I think this is, not as good. It can either be too sloppy or too stiff. Also, you can bend it. But luckily, if you have one of these, you can actually replace it with a micro switch. If you turn the board here, you see three holes around here, with three soldering pads. Well, actually, you can put a micro switch in there, so they thought of that. Guess there were some transitional models, and they thought, well, we're not quite sure if the leaf switch will perform well enough, so we play safe. We add the option to go with a micro switch. Another thing is that the later models have an internal wiring connector, so if your joystick cable is broken, you can easily replace it. But with the older models, like this one, it's soldered on the board. It's not really a big deal if you're handy with a soldering iron, but still, it's a small change they made. Other than that, the two sticks aren't really all that different. Another thing, if you want to replace a leaf switch version with a micro switch, is this thing. The leaf switch models have an extra bit of plastic, and it's not there on the micro switch version. So, just to demonstrate, I can just pull this tiny little piece out. That's in all the leaf switch versions. So if you take it out, you have it basically prepared for a micro switch. Well, that's pretty much all I have to say about the Suzo joysticks. I hope it sort of clarified things, and well, maybe you can open your own joysticks and look what's inside. Maybe you've got a different revision, I don't know. Would be interesting though. Oh, well, and another final thing. Some of these have a little production or test sticker in there. So that way you can actually tell how old it is. This one was made in May of 1988 and was tested by a person with the initials of IVR. So I don't know if there's some people from Suzo in Rotterdam who actually assembled these, but if you are one of these, let me know. I want to know the story about the whole design revisions and the different models that you make. Well, that was pretty much it. Maybe I see you next time.